Hi, my name is Rob Watson. I'm a film producer from London, and Alec has asked me to talk a little bit about my favourite ever movie. I suppose, like most people, my favourite movie was something that I first saw when I was very young. When I was a really young child, when I was about 8 years old, I was totally obsessed with sharks. And like most children have an obsession with something like dinosaurs or cars, I was really, really interested in sharks. I had hundreds of books about them. And one day my mum said, I've heard about this movie. It was released when I was, a teenager, but I kind of didn't, it really passed me by. So, and it's called Jaws. Would you like to watch it with me? And I said, of course, there's the sharks in it. So we sat down to watch Jaws on video when I was, again, about 8 years old. And to say that I was scared beyond belief doesn't really give it credit. It was one of the scariest experiences of my life. Right from the first sequence where the bather was eaten by the shark up until right at the end. I can think of two particular sequences I'll talk about in a moment. It was one of the scariest things I'd ever seen. But it was also one of the most fascinating things I'd ever seen. And it was the first time that I'd ever realised how cinema could kind of move and scare and entertain you at any one time. And that was, I think, one of the things that really made me decide eventually that I wanted to be making films. And I think it's one of the first times from from cinema's perspective, actually, that because it redefines what the summer blockbuster was. No one had ever made a film like this before. It was the biggest movie for at least 5 or 6 years before maybe Star Wars: Empire Strikes Back came along. That it smashed all box office records. It was the first time that film was really seen as a kind of entertaining mass audience idea. So I think that that's one of the best things about Jaws is that Spielberg, who I think we can forget was only 26 years old when he directed the film, really understood how to make an audience tick and manipulate their feelings. I mean, one of the things that I think is so good about Jaws is that it's really funny, and that was because Spielberg had hired a guy called Carl Gottlieb, who was a comedian and he was also a comedy writer, to do a polish on Peter Benchley, who wrote the original novel's screenplay. And he managed to make this film really, what he did was, I don't think it was something that many films had done before, was that he managed to alleviate all of those incredibly tense moments, those moments, on the boat, the moments in the shark cage, the moments when they're kind of when they're driving along and they find that boat with the guy's head that pops out. They managed to alleviate that with a really bone-dry sense of humour. And it's one of the very interesting things about Jaws, was that they had a bunch of writers. It wasn't just Spielberg and Benchley who were doing it, but he was bringing in people to ad-lib. He was bringing in, the actors were writing some of their own dialogue. It was a really interesting way of making a film. You hear all of these incredible stories. I mean, you could talk for hours about the spectacular destructions that happens on the set of Jaws, the shark sinking, the crew mutinying, Spielberg being thrown in, fearing for his life when he was being thrown into the sea at the end of the shoot. Robert Shaw acting up, which is all documented in a number of wonderful books, and a fantastic documentary which is on the back of the special edition DVD, which is excellent. But from that chaos and from that weird kind of strange way of making a film, actually what they managed to do was they managed to create a template for movies, for big Hollywood movies that now survives today. And I think that you can see a lot of what Spielberg has become in those first few steps as a young director, is that he manages to make a family-friendly movie which is also very scary and very involving, but manages to pitch it just at the right angle so that children can go and see it, adults can go and see it, teenagers on dates can go and see it. It's a very finely crafted balance, And I think that's one of the reasons that it still stands up today. It's still very, very scary. It's still very, very funny. There's a sequence, a bit I said about a moment ago, with a head popping out of the bottom of the boat that I still can't watch, and I'm a 28-year-old man who makes films for a living. Um, so, in summary, I think it's such a precision piece of work, even arising out of the chaos. This wonderful cast, Robert Shaw's fantastic monologue about the Indianapolis, halfway through the movie, the score, which you can hear one bar of the score and know exactly what it is. Everything in that movie comes together, even though the chaos behind the scenes didn't. And I think that's a really, really wonderful way of looking at the movie. So I don't think Jaws will ever be beaten in my affections as my favourite ever movie.